What would you do if you discovered the person you've shared a bed with for 14 years was living a double life so horrific it would make international headlines? On a sun-drenched Tuesday morning in Beverly Hills, 38-year-old Kavita Mehra stood in her pristine marble kitchen, preparing breakfast for her family. The morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a life that appeared absolutely perfect from every angle. Her 12-year-old daughter Priya sat at the granite breakfast bar, reviewing her math homework, while 9-year-old Arjun wolfed down his cereal before catching the school bus. This was the picture of the American dream, wrapped in the warmth of Indian family values. Kavita had immigrated to the United States 15 years earlier, following her marriage to Dr. Rohit Mehra, a man who had already begun establishing himself as one of Los Angeles's most sought-after cosmetic surgeons. Their story was one that their community held up as an inspiration, two ambitious Indians who had built something extraordinary in their adopted homeland. Rohit's Beverly Hills clinic, Mehra Aesthetic Surgery Center, bore his name in elegant gold lettering, a testament to his success in a field where reputation meant everything. The Mehra family lived in a $2.8 million home in an exclusive gated community, where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets and luxury cars glided silently through tree-lined streets. Their neighbors included entertainment executives, tech entrepreneurs, and other successful medical professionals. At community gatherings and temple functions, other Indian families would speak of the Mehras with a mixture of admiration and envy. Rohit was frequently invited to speak at medical conferences, while Kavita was active in their children's school fundraisers and cultural events. Dr. Rohit Mehra had built his practice on a foundation of trust and discretion. His clientele included Hollywood actors seeking subtle enhancements, wealthy socialites maintaining their youth, and successful professionals wanting to feel more confident. His waiting room featured original artwork, fresh orchids, and the kind of ambient lighting that made everyone look 10 years younger. Patients often commented on his gentle bedside manner and his ability to deliver natural-looking results that enhanced rather than transformed. Kavita had willingly stepped away from her own career in marketing when their first child was born. She found fulfillment in creating a warm home environment, volunteering at the children's schools, and supporting Rohit's demanding career. Their marriage seemed to be built on mutual respect and shared goals. They attended temple together every Sunday, hosted elaborate dinner parties for friends and colleagues, and took annual family vacations to exotic destinations. But by the summer of 2023, subtle changes began appearing in their carefully orchestrated life. Rohit, who had always been punctual about family dinners, started arriving home later each evening. His explanations were always reasonable. A complicated surgery that ran over schedule, a consultation with a particularly anxious patient, administrative meetings that couldn't be postponed. Kavita accepted these explanations without question, understanding that success in medicine required sacrifice and dedication. The first real crack in her trust appeared during what should have been a routine conversation about their weekend plans. Rohit's phone buzzed insistently during breakfast, and when Kavita glanced at the screen, she noticed the caller ID simply read, "Office, urgent." When she casually asked if everything was okay at the clinic, Rohit's response was sharper than usual. He snapped that she shouldn't worry about things she didn't understand, then immediately apologized, blaming his reaction on stress from a difficult case. Over the following weeks, Kavita noticed her husband becoming increasingly protective of his phone. Where he had once left it charging on the kitchen counter or tossed it carelessly on the coffee table, he now kept it constantly within arm's reach. During family movie nights, she observed him responding to text messages with an urgency that seemed disproportionate to what she assumed were routine medical inquiries. When she jokingly asked if he was having an affair with his phone, Rohit's laugh sounded forced. The changes weren't limited to his communication habits. Rohit began working on Sundays, missing the temple services that had been a cornerstone of their family routine. He explained that he was expanding the clinic services and needed to personally oversee the renovations and new equipment installations. His dedication to work had always been admirable, but this felt different, more secretive, more urgent, and somehow more personal. Kavita tried to dismiss her growing unease as the natural result of a long marriage settling into middle age. She convinced herself that successful couples weathered these kinds of phases, that Rohit's behavior was simply the price of ambition in a competitive field. She focused on maintaining their home's warmth and stability, ensuring that their children's lives remained unaffected by whatever stress their father was experiencing. But late at night, When Rohit thought she was sleeping, Kavita would hear him taking hushed phone calls in his home office. The conversations were conducted in a mixture of English and Hindi, and while she couldn't make out specific words, the tone suggested urgency and concern. These calls often lasted for 30 minutes or more, ending only when Rohit noticed light filtering under their bedroom door, indicating that dawn was approaching. The man she had married, the gentle doctor who remembered patients' birthdays, who donated anonymously to charitable causes, who read bedtime stories to their children in 3 different languages, seemed to be slowly disappearing. In his place was someone more guarded, more distant, carrying secrets that created an invisible barrier between them. As autumn arrived in Los Angeles, bringing cooler evenings and the promise of holiday celebrations, Kavita found herself studying her husband's face across the dinner table, searching for traces of the man she thought she knew completely. She had no idea that within months, her perfect world would crumble in ways she could never have imagined, revealing horrors that would make her question everything she believed about love, trust, and the true nature of the man sleeping beside her. The first concrete sign that something was fundamentally wrong came through the most mundane of discoveries, their monthly bank statements. Kavita had always handled the household finances while Rohit focused on his practice, a division of labor that had worked seamlessly for 14 years. She paid the mortgage, managed the children's school fees, and kept track of their various investment accounts. It was a responsibility she took seriously, maintaining detailed spreadsheets and ensuring every dollar was accounted for. But in November 2023, as she reconciled their primary checking account, Kavita noticed deposits that made her stomach clench with confusion. 3 separate transfers, each for exactly $47,000, had appeared over the past 6 weeks. The source was listed simply as MAS Holdings LLC, a name she had never heard Rohit mention. When she cross-referenced these deposits with their tax documents and business records, she found no trace of this company anywhere in their financial history. That evening, over dinner, she casually asked Rohit about the deposits. His fork paused midway to his mouth, and for just a moment, she saw something flicker across his face, surprise, perhaps even fear. He recovered quickly, explaining that MAS Holdings was a consulting arrangement he had entered into with a group of international medical tourism companies. The money, he claimed, came from advising wealthy clients who wanted to combine cosmetic procedures with luxury vacations in Los Angeles. The explanation sounded reasonable, even impressive. Medical tourism was a growing industry, and it made sense that someone of Rohit's reputation would be sought after for such arrangements. But something about his delivery felt rehearsed, as though he had been preparing for this conversation. More troubling was his immediate follow-up suggestion that perhaps it was time to hire an accountant to handle their finances, relieving Kavita of what he suddenly described as an unnecessary burden. Over the following weeks, Kavita began paying closer attention to details she had previously overlooked. The clinic's expansion, which Rohit had mentioned in passing, seemed to be happening at an unprecedented pace. Construction crews were working around the clock, installing what appeared to be entirely new wings to the building. When she drove past the clinic during her usual errands, she noticed that certain windows had been fitted with frosted glass, obscuring any view of the interior. Security cameras had appeared overnight, positioned at every entrance and corner of the building. More concerning were the changes in Rohit himself. The man who had once shared every detail of his day, who had sought her opinion on everything from patient cases to office decor, had become a stranger living in their home. Conversations that had once flowed naturally now felt stilted and careful. When she asked about his day, his responses were generic and brief. When she mentioned seeing increased activity at the clinic, he would change the subject or suddenly remember urgent calls he needed to make. The distance between them created a loneliness that Kavita had never experienced in their marriage. She found herself eating dinner alone most evenings, the children's chatter filling a void that Rohit's presence had once occupied. Their bedroom, which had been a sanctuary of intimacy and quiet conversation, became a place where 2 people slept side by side without truly connecting. Rohit would come to bed long after she had fallen asleep and leave before she woke, maintaining schedules that seemed designed to minimize their interaction. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in December. Rohit had forgotten his briefcase during his rushed morning departure, and Kavita decided to surprise him by dropping it off at the clinic. She had done this countless times over the years, often staying to chat with his office manager or grab lunch together between his appointments. This time, however, She was told at the reception desk that Dr. Mehra was in private consultation and could not be disturbed under any circumstances. As she waited in the familiar lobby, Kavita noticed changes that hadn't registered during her previous visits. New staff members, young women who avoided eye contact and spoke in whispers, moved through the corridors with an efficiency that seemed almost military. The atmosphere, once welcoming and warm, now felt sterile and somehow secretive. When she asked the receptionist about scheduling her own long-overdue dermatology appointment, she was told that Dr. Mehra was no longer taking routine appointments and was focusing exclusively on specialized international cases. That evening, driven by a desperation to understand what was happening to her marriage, Kavita made a decision that would have been unthinkable months earlier. While Rohit was in his study taking one of his mysterious late-night calls, she quietly entered his home office. Her hands trembled as she approached his mahogany desk, knowing that what she was about to do represented a fundamental violation of trust. Hidden behind a false back in the desk's bottom drawer, she discovered documents that made her blood run cold. Foreign passports bearing Rohit's photograph but different names. Bank account statements from institutions in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland showing balances that exceeded their reported income by millions of dollars. Most disturbing were the medical files, detailed records of young women from various countries, complete with photographs, physical descriptions, and notations in Rohit's handwriting that used terminology she didn't recognize. The faces in those photographs would haunt her dreams. Young women, barely out of their teens, with eyes that seemed to hold a sadness that transcended language barriers. Their names, Priya, Meera, Sita, Rashida, were written in Rohit's careful script alongside dates, numbers, and cryptic abbreviations that suggested ongoing medical monitoring. These were not the glamorous socialites and actresses she associated with his practice. These were women who looked vulnerable, desperate, and somehow trapped. As she photographed the documents with shaking hands, Kavita realized that her husband of 14 years, the father of her children, the man she had built her entire adult life around, was living a double life so elaborate and secretive that she questioned whether she had ever truly known him at all. The evidence pointed to something far more sinister than a simple affair or financial impropriety. This was systematic, organized, and involved women who appeared to have no voice or agency in whatever was being done to them. Standing in her husband's office at 2 a.m., surrounded by evidence of deception so profound it made her question her own sanity, Kavita made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out exactly what Dr. Rohit Mehra was really doing in that clinic, regardless of what it might cost her marriage, her family, or her carefully constructed life. The perfect facade had crumbled completely, and there was no path forward except through the darkness that lay ahead. 3 weeks after discovering the hidden documents, Kavita found herself sitting in her car across from Rohit's clinic at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. The parking lot was empty except for a single black SUV she didn't recognize. Security lights cast harsh shadows across the building's facade, and the frosted windows that had once seemed like a minor renovation detail now appeared ominous and deliberate. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying Rohit's schedule, noting patterns in the clinic's after-hours activity, and most importantly, obtaining a copy of the building's master key from the cleaning service. The Filipino woman who managed the overnight cleaning crew had worked for Rohit for 3 years, but had recently confided to Kavita during a chance encounter that she was no longer allowed to clean certain areas of the building. When pressed gently, the woman had admitted that she found the new restrictions strange and unsettling. Armed with the key and a small flashlight, Kavita entered through the clinic's rear entrance. The familiar lobby, so welcoming during daylight hours, felt alien in the darkness. The scent of medical-grade disinfectant seemed stronger at night, mixing with something else she couldn't identify, something that made her stomach turn. She moved carefully through corridors she knew well, past examination rooms where she had once felt comfortable and safe. It was behind an unmarked door near the building's eastern wing that Kavita discovered what Rohit had been so desperate to hide. A narrow staircase descended into what she had assumed was simply additional storage space. The temperature dropped noticeably as she descended, and fluorescent lights hummed to life automatically as motion sensors detected her presence. What she found in the basement shattered every assumption she had ever made about human decency. The space was divided into small rooms, each secured with heavy locks more suited to a prison than a medical facility. Through reinforced windows she could see women, young women who appeared to be in their late teens and early 20s, lying on narrow beds. Some appeared to be sleeping, but their breathing was shallow and irregular in a way that suggested sedation rather than natural rest. The rooms were Spartan to the point of cruelty. Each contained only a bed, a small sink, and a bucket. The walls were painted institutional white, and there were no windows to indicate time of day or connection to the outside world. Medical equipment, force stands, monitors, and supplies she couldn't identify suggested that procedures were being performed in this underground facility. In one room, Kavita found a young woman sitting awake, staring at the ceiling with eyes that seemed to focus on nothing. When their eyes met through the window, the woman didn't react, didn't even seem to register Kavita's presence. The complete absence of hope or curiosity in that gaze was more terrifying than screams would have been. But it was in the seventh room that Kavita's worst fears crystallized into devastating reality. Sitting on a bed, looking older and infinitely sadder than when they had last met, was Mehra, the young refugee girl Rohit had claimed to help 3 years earlier. Kavita remembered her clearly. 18 years old, recently arrived from Bangladesh, desperate for medical treatment for injuries sustained during her journey to America. The flashback hit Kavita with brutal clarity. She had been the one to answer the door that evening when Mehra arrived with a social worker. The girl had been shy but hopeful, grateful for Rohit's offer to provide free medical care. Kavita had made tea, offered gentle conversation, and felt genuine warmth watching her husband's apparent compassion for someone so vulnerable. When Mehra stopped coming to their home visits, Rohit had explained that he had helped her obtain proper documentation and that she had moved to another city to start fresh with relatives. Now, 3 years later, Mehra remained trapped in a basement prison, her hope extinguished and her freedom stolen by the very man who had promised to help her. The girl who had once smiled shyly over cups of tea was now a ghost of herself, existing rather than living in this underground hell. Forcing herself to continue her investigation, Kavita discovered Rohit's office computer in an adjacent room. The files she accessed revealed the full scope of his operation. Detailed records showed a systematic network involving false medical visas, fabricated treatment plans, and coordination with criminal organizations across multiple countries. Young women were being brought to the United States under the pretense of receiving medical care, only to be trapped in a cycle of exploitation that used Rohit's legitimate medical practice as perfect cover. Financial records showed millions of dollars flowing through offshore accounts. The money came from sources that made Kavita's blood run cold, payments that could only represent the buying and selling of human lives. Her husband wasn't just participating in this network, he was operating as a key facilitator, using his medical credentials and respected position in the community to legitimize an operation of unthinkable cruelty. Most devastating were the personal files that showed Rohit's direct involvement with the victims. Photos and videos documented not just the medical procedures being performed, but intimate encounters that revealed the true nature of his treatment of these women. The man she had shared a bed with, the father of her children, was not just enabling their exploitation. He was personally participating in their abuse. Standing in that basement office, surrounded by evidence of systematic human trafficking and personal betrayal beyond her worst nightmares, Kavita felt her entire identity disintegrating. Every memory of their marriage was now tainted. Every community event where people had praised Rohit's humanitarian work now seemed like a cruel joke. Every night she had lain beside him, every meal they had shared, every family vacation and intimate moment was now colored by the knowledge of what he was capable of. The realization that her children had been living under the same roof as this monster filled her with a terror that transcended personal betrayal. How many times had Rohit come home from this place and kissed their daughter goodnight? How many family dinners had they shared while women suffered in cages beneath his clinic? As sirens wailed in the distance, security systems she hadn't noticed triggering some kind of alarm, Kavita knew that her old life was ending forever. Whatever came next, there could be no return to the illusion of normalcy. The perfect facade hadn't just crumbled. It had revealed an abyss of evil that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The sirens had been a false alarm, a security system malfunction that brought patrol cars but no real investigation. Kavita managed to escape the clinic undetected, but she couldn't escape the images burned into her memory. For 2 sleepless days, she sat in her pristine kitchen, staring at her children as they ate breakfast and prepared for school, wondering how to protect them from a truth that would destroy their world as completely as it had destroyed hers. The decision to confront Rohit came not from courage, but from the desperate realization that silence was no longer an option. Every moment she delayed was another moment that Mehra and the other women remained trapped in that basement hell. Every meal she shared with her husband felt like complicity in his crimes. On Thursday evening, after the children had gone to bed, Kavita waited in Rohit's home study with printouts of everything she had discovered. When Rohit entered the room at 11:30 p.m., he found his wife sitting behind his desk, the hidden document spread across its mahogany surface like accusations. His face went through a series of transformations: surprise, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned wariness that told Kavita he had been expecting this moment. "I can explain everything," he said, his voice carrying the same calm authority he used with anxious patience. He moved slowly toward his desk, hands visible, as though approaching a dangerous animal. "You've stumbled into something you don't understand, Kavita. Something complicated." But when she held up the photograph of Mehra, the young refugee he had claimed to help, his composure cracked. The expression that crossed his face wasn't guilt or remorse, but irritation, as though she had discovered a mildly embarrassing secret rather than evidence of systematic human trafficking. "You're being dramatic," he continued, attempting to establish control. "These women come here voluntarily. They're seeking better lives, and I provide opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise. It's not what you think." The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Kavita almost questioned her own perception of what she had witnessed. This was the man who had convinced her community that he was a humanitarian, who had persuaded immigration officials that his victims were legitimate patients, who had manipulated everyone around him for years. "I saw them, Rohit," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage rather than fear. "I saw Mehra locked in a cage. I saw your computer files. I know about the money, the offshore accounts, the videos." She stood up, her hands shaking as she pointed to the evidence scattered across his desk. "These aren't opportunities, they're slaves." For the first time in their confrontation, Rohit's mask slipped completely. The concern and authority vanished, replaced by cold calculation. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice now carrying an edge she had never heard before. "These organizations don't give you choices, Kavita. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. My practice, our family, our entire life. It would all disappear if I didn't cooperate." The lie was so breathtaking in its audacity that Kavita felt something fundamental shift inside her. This wasn't the man she had married speaking. This was someone who had been manipulating her for years, someone who was now trying to make her complicit in his crimes through fear and manufactured sympathy. "You're going to call the police," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're going to turn yourself in, and you're going to help those women. Tonight." Rohit's laugh was bitter and entirely without humor. "And destroy our children's lives? Destroy everything we've built? You think they'll thank you when their father is in prison, and they're the children of a convicted trafficker?" He moved closer, his tone becoming almost seductive. "We can fix this quietly. Move the operation somewhere else, help the women transition gradually, keep our family intact. No one has to know what you discovered." The suggestion that she become part of his network, that she help manage the systematic abuse of vulnerable women, triggered something primal in Kavita. "Those women have names," she said, her voice rising. "They have families. They're someone's daughters, just like Priya is mine." "Priya is exactly why you need to think carefully," Rohit said, and now his voice carried an unmistakable threat. "Do you want her to grow up knowing what her father was? Do you want her to carry that shame for the rest of her life? Some secrets are better kept." When Kavita reached for her phone to call 911, Rohit moved with surprising speed. His hand closed around her wrist with a grip that was both familiar and completely alien. The same hands that had once held her gently were now restraining her with barely controlled violence. "You're not making that call," he said, and for the first time in 14 years of marriage, Kavita was genuinely afraid of her husband. The struggle that followed was brief but vicious. Rohit tried to grab her phone, while Kavita fought to break free from his grip. She had never imagined being in physical combat with the father of her children, and the surreal nature of the moment made everything feel like a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. When Rohit's grip tightened painfully around her throat, survival instincts took over. Kavita grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from his desk, a gift from the Medical Association honoring his community service, and swung it with desperate force. The sound it made connecting with Rohit's temple was sickeningly solid, like a branch breaking. He released her immediately, stumbling backward with a look of surprise rather than pain. For a moment, they stared at each other across the study, both breathing heavily, both realizing that their marriage and their family had just ended forever. Then Rohit collapsed. The silence that followed was more profound than any sound Kavita had ever experienced. She knelt beside her husband's body, checking for a pulse she already knew she wouldn't find. His eyes stared at the ceiling with the same empty expression she had seen in Mehra's face, the complete absence of consciousness, of presence, of life. In the space of 5 minutes, Kavita Mehra had transformed from a respected member of her community into a widow, a single mother, and possibly a murderer. The perfect life she had built was gone. The man she had loved was dead, and 23 women in a basement prison were still waiting for someone to save them. Sitting on the floor of her husband's study, surrounded by evidence of his crimes and faced with the reality of what she had done, Kavita realized that the hardest decisions of her life were still ahead of her. For exactly 17 minutes, Kavita sat motionless beside her husband's body, her mind cycling through impossible scenarios. Could she stage a burglary? Claim he had fallen and hit his head? The thoughts felt alien and desperate, the reasoning of someone whose moral compass had been shattered along with everything else she had believed about her life. But as she looked at the evidence scattered across Rohit's desk, the photographs of trafficked women, the financial records, the documentation of systematic abuse, she realized that covering up his death would mean abandoning Mehra and 22 other women to whatever fate awaited them in that basement prison. Some decisions, she understood with devastating clarity, define who you truly are when everything else is stripped away. At 12:47 a.m. on December 15, 2023, Kavita Mehra called 911. Her voice was remarkably steady as she reported that she had killed her husband in self-defense, and that there were trafficking victims who needed immediate rescue at his medical clinic. The dispatcher, initially confused by the combination of domestic violence and human trafficking in a single call, remained on the line as patrol cars were dispatched to both locations. The first officers to arrive at the Mehra residence found Kavita sitting in her kitchen, still wearing the blood-stained clothes from her confrontation with Rohit. She had prepared detailed written statements explaining everything she had discovered, complete with photographs and documentation she had gathered over the previous weeks. Her cooperation was so complete and methodical that investigators later described it as the most organized confession they had ever encountered. Simultaneously, the tactical team that entered the clinic's basement discovered a scene that would haunt seasoned officers for years to come. 23 women, ranging in age from 17 to 24, were found in various states of sedation and medical intervention. The immediate priority was medical care. Several victims required hospitalization for malnutrition, infections, and complications from unauthorized surgical procedures. Mehra, whom Kavita had specifically mentioned in her statement, was among those rushed to UCLA Medical Center in critical condition. The investigation that followed revealed an operation of staggering scope and sophistication. FBI financial crime specialists traced money flows through 17 different offshore accounts, uncovering profits exceeding $12 million over a 3-year period. Immigration records showed that Rohit had facilitated fraudulent medical visas for over 200 women, though many had been moved through the network to other locations before authorities could locate them. The Indian American community in Los Angeles reacted with a mixture of shock, denial, and profound shame. Temple leaders struggled to address congregants' questions about how such evil could have existed among them undetected. Several families quietly withdrew from community events, uncertain whether their previous interactions with Dr. Mehra might have somehow implicated them in his crimes. Media coverage was relentless and often sensationalized. Headlines like Doctor of Death and Beverly Hills House of Horrors dominated local news cycles for weeks. National networks picked up the story, focusing particularly on the role of legitimate medical practices in facilitating human trafficking. The case prompted congressional hearings on oversight of medical visa programs and sparked reforms in how foreign patients' treatments are monitored. For Kavita, the legal proceedings became a strange form of public therapy. The district attorney's office, faced with overwhelming evidence of Rohit's crimes and clear documentation of the physical struggle, offered a plea agreement for voluntary manslaughter with mitigating circumstances. Her defense attorney argued that she had acted not only in self-defense but in defense of the trafficked women who had no other advocate. The judge who sentenced Kavita to 5 years with eligibility for parole in 3 acknowledged the impossible position she had found herself in. "Mrs. Mehra," he said during sentencing, "you discovered that the person closest to you was a monster, and you made the choice to prioritize justice for his victims over your own safety and comfort. While the law cannot excuse taking a life, it can recognize the extraordinary circumstances that led to your actions. The aftermath for her children was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of the entire tragedy. Priya, now 13, and Arjun, 10, had to be placed temporarily with Kavita's sister while she served her sentence. They underwent extensive therapy to process not only their father's death but the revelation of his crimes. Child psychologists noted that learning your parent was both victim and perpetrator of violence creates a unique form of trauma that requires years to properly address. Of the 23 women rescued from the clinic, 18 survived their ordeal and were eventually able to testify against the broader trafficking network. Mehra, after months of physical and psychological rehabilitation, became a powerful advocate for trafficking victims' rights. Her testimony at congressional hearings helped pass legislation strengthening penalties for medical professionals who exploit their positions to facilitate human trafficking. The ripple effects extended far beyond the immediate victims. The medical board launched investigations into oversight procedures, implementing new requirements for international patient treatment protocols. Several other physicians came forward with suspicions about colleagues' practices that had previously gone unreported, leading to additional investigations and reforms. Kavita was released after serving 3 years and 2 months of her sentence. She emerged to find a world forever changed by her actions. The family home had been sold to pay legal fees and provide restitution to victims. Her children, now teenagers, had learned to live with the complexity of loving a mother who had killed their father to save strangers. Today, Kavita works as a victim advocate with a nonprofit organization that assists trafficking survivors. She speaks rarely about her case, preferring to focus on helping others navigate the legal and psychological challenges of escaping exploitation. When asked about her decision that night in Rohit's study, she simply says that some choices define not just who you are, but who you're willing to become. The case of Dr. Rohit Mehra and his trafficking operation serves as a chilling reminder that evil often hides behind the most respectable facades. It demonstrates how predators exploit positions of trust and authority to victimize the most vulnerable. But perhaps most importantly, it shows us that when confronted with unthinkable choices, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary moral courage.